Progress.
Okay, we will wait until we get the signal from Rob up in the, there, we've got it. All right. So I want to welcome everyone to our February meeting of the Budget, Capital, and Personnel Committee, and welcome Amanda Champion, our new member. We also want to note for the record that Lee Shurtleff has asked to be excused, and Mike Lane has asked that we accommodate his being double scheduled. He will be coming in later in the meeting, but for now we have a quorum of 3 and we will get going. Taylor, I don't see that we have any public comment. Okay, good. Changes to the agenda. I believe we're removing something. Norma, do you want to remind me what that is?
Yes, it's hard to tell. I believe it would be Resolution C on related to the charter change for workforce development.
Okay, so we're removing that from the agenda. That's fine.
I think there's multiple. There's 2 resolutions go along with that. All of that whole group will be removed for today. Pending a conversation with.
So it's C and D.
Yep.
All right. And we are adding a resolution for a budget adjustment accepting New York State healthcare worker bonuses and funding for vesting periods 1 and 2. That's ID number 11453. I don't think we need to vote to add this. No, this came from administration. Okay, fine. So that's all done. So we have minutes approval. And if I could get a motion on the minutes.
Looking like you and me today, Rich.
Yeah, so you guys need to take turns moving and seconding. All right, so Rich moved, Amanda seconds. Any comments on the minutes? Seeing none, all in favor? That's unanimous, thank you. We have an advisory board appointment. Is this one we have to vote on? Or is this just an informational?
Safer to vote. It's WDIC, right?
Okay. So this is a resolution or an appointment, ID number 11476, appointing Nicholas Bennett to the Workforce Diversity and Inclusion Committee. Amanda moves, Rich seconds. Do we need to go into executive session to discuss this? Okay, seeing no interest in that, any discussion? All right, all in favor? That's unanimous. So now we get to the county administrator's report, and Norma, do you want to do the resolutions and then the report, or vice versa?
I have just the resolutions, and some of these I believe are more rubies than county admins, but
okay, I'm going to suggest that we do B, E, and F and the finance director's report before we get to the resolution on updating the administrative policy manual, because
okay.
Amanda and I have had some exchange of ideas of some things that we wanted to discuss about changing or adding to that as written. So that'll take some time. Let's do the easy stuff first.
All right.
So let's see. Let's do Resolution B, calling on the state of New York to continue to pass Affordable Care Act enhanced federal Medicaid assistance percentage funds through to counties as Congress intended. ID 11481. Can I get a motion? Rich moves, Amanda seconds. What a surprise.
Why would we want that?
Yeah, this was a resolution that I initially adapted from a template that NISAC sent around. I mean, we're well aware of why this is important to us. it's going to cost bokoodles of bucks to counties all over the state if that EF map doesn't continue to get passed through. And the impact here in Tompkins County alone is probably going to be in excess of $1 million, which is about 2.5% of our tax levy. I find that really interesting since Albany apparently hasn't figured out that that kind of increase in tax levy when we're under tax caps doesn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. And then Norma got some assistance from Tom Herden, who is here. So if we have any questions or just want to get this EF map thing explained for our own benefit and for the benefit of anyone who happens to be watching, this might be a good opportunity, Tom, for you to explain how this all works.
I would be glad to try. I guess maybe I should ask, thank you, I should ask if there are questions, or if not, I can start to explain, and then maybe you'll have questions.
I think that's a really good idea, because nobody understands this better than you do. Okay.
I guess the first thing that we should just talk about briefly is what that acronym EFMAP means. The amount that the federal government historically has reimbursed states for Medicaid costs is referred to by the acronym FMAP, which stands for Federal Medical Assistance Percentage. When the Affordable Care Act was implemented, and then a couple of years ago, when the Family First Coronavirus Relief Act was passed by the federal government, both of those pieces of federal legislation increased the amount of federal reimbursement for, in the case of the Affordable Care Act, for some persons covered by Medicaid and for some services covered by Medicaid. In the case of the Family First Coronavirus Relief Act, it was an across-the-board but temporary increase in the federal reimbursement rate, an increase of 6.2%. So that E in EFMAP stands for enhanced federal medical, stands for enhanced, and in the case of the Affordable Care Act, it has been and is expected to continue to be a permanent and ongoing increase in federal reimbursement rate. It was always the case that the Family First Coronavirus Response Act derived EFMAP increase would be temporary. And the way that the federal government has administered that is that they had promised states early on during the epidemic, during the pandemic, that they would let states know within, I believe it was 90 days of the end of a calendar quarter, if that aid would be discontinued as of the following quarter. So early on in each quarter, New York State and other states have known whether that federal aid would continue. I have not seen any information directly from the feds on this point, but the executive budget presumes that federal reimbursement, that enhanced reimbursement, will continue through the end of this calendar year, but at a gradually reduced rate, so that in the first quarter of this year, New York State's expecting that the federal government will continue to pay that extra 6.2%. In the second quarter, 5%. In the third quarter, 2.5%. And in the final quarter of this calendar year, just 1.5% over its usual reimbursement rate. What the governor's proposal, the executive budget proposal, can be summarized in two ways. The first way is that starting with the state fiscal year 2024-25, the governor is proposing that counties will start paying the total amount of what was established in, give me a second to check the year, what was established in 2012 as the statutory cap on local contributions to the cost of Medicaid.
That's seven and a half, around $7 million, remind me.
For our county, just a moment, it's more than that.
Oh, there was a statewide cap, I guess, that was expressed in billions, like.
So there are two different things that unfortunately get referred to as a cap. One cap is this, it's a county-specific cap on how much counties can be expected to provide to the overall costs of Medicaid. That's sometimes referred to as the statutory cap. For our county, the value of that cap is $12,200,000, and I'm going to round up a little bit, $12,298,000 a year. The other thing that's sometimes referred to as a Medicaid cap is the state implemented a cap on how much money local districts could receive in the way of reimbursement for our administrative costs for the Medicaid program. But that cap hasn't changed in many years, and counties have actually been spending less and less on Medicaid administration while that cap has been in place. So it doesn't really come up, but sometimes that might be the figure that you had in mind, Deb.
Okay, thanks, Tom. The resolution that came out of NISAC had a bunch of numbers in it, and now it's just soup in my head.
Right. Yeah, that's very easy to have happen. This information that I just shared about, I'm sorry, so I have to reset a little bit. So the main gist of the proposal in the governor's budget is that starting not this April 1st, but starting April 1st of next year, that the state will start obliging counties to contribute the entire amount of their statutory cap. So a little bit of history. So the state put that cap in place because Medicaid costs were increasing quickly and unpredictably, and the state comptroller at the time, Alan Havisi, had projected that if those increases kept at the same pace, and if counties were still expected to contribute the percentage that they had been contributing, that counties in general would need to raise their property tax rates by 50% over the course of 3 years. So a good thing was done. The legislature and the still fairly newly elected Governor Cuomo put a cap in place, a district-specific cap in place on how much we would have to contribute. That amount was increased over the course of 3 years, and since 2015, that amount has been supposed to be fixed. So that was a great good thing. That has saved counties across the state, I think you used the word earlier, boodles of money.
Boodles.
Boodles, yeah. So then another good thing happened, but it kind of muddied the waters a little bit and made this all harder to talk about, which was the federal government passed the Affordable Care Act. There was language in the Affordable Care Act that said that states that require their subsidiary governments to contribute to the cost of Medicaid couldn't require those subordinate parts of government to contribute more on a percentage basis than they had been contributing at a certain point in time. That language has been interpreted for a number of years by the State Department of Health as if it was requiring that EFMAP, Affordable Care Act EFMAP, be shared proportionally with counties. The state has not said this directly, but their actions suggest that their interpretation has changed from an interpretation where that language requires that they share EFMAP to that language precludes their requiring counties to contribute more than a percentage share of what of all Medicaid costs than they had been contributing as of, I think it was 2015. So that's what that's what it seems has given the state the freedom to stop sharing EFMAP, which is what the governor's proposing. So the reason that the Affordable Care Act, I say it was a good thing because it was reducing states' costs for Medicaid, and it was a good thing because the state was sharing the benefit of that with local districts up until potentially this coming state fiscal year. The bad thing was that New York State, at least, found it very hard to project how much additional money that federal reimbursement would amount to, and how much would be earned by each county. And so they implemented a process whereby they would estimate what each county would earn in the way of that enhanced federal reimbursement, and then they would reduce the amounts that the county had to contribute toward the cost of Medicaid, but only by 80% of their projection. What they stated was, we're not sure about our projections, so we're only going to credit you with 80%, and the reason that should give us enough wiggle room so that if we've overestimated, you won't end up owing more money. And if we've underestimated, don't worry about it. After the end of the state fiscal year, we will reconcile what really happened with our estimates. And if you are owed additional federal reimbursement, we'll give that to you.
And that's the reconciliation they haven't done since 2017.
That is the EFMAP reconciliation. Yep. I don't remember off the top of my head if the year you mentioned is accurate, but it may well be. Yep. It's been several years, 5 or 6 years at this point. For several years, they did follow that process, and then they stopped and haven't, like you said, for 6 or 7 years now. Okay, so as a transition from what has been so up to present and what the governor is proposing will be so starting during state fiscal 2024-25, the governor is proposing to stop sharing the Affordable Care Act derived enhanced federal reimbursement starting April 1st of this year, but to continue sharing the Family First Coronavirus Act derived EFMAP that they're expecting, states expecting to receive from the federal government through the end of this year. And I think that, again, no one from the state has said this, but I think that they're seeing this continuation but decrease in the amount of the COVID-related EFMAP as an opportunity to kind of provide for a smoother landing, or an opportunity for counties to transition between what has been so and what's going to be so.
So may I ask, I want to be sure I understand what you said before. So this
Sure.
family-friendly enhanced assistance, that's scheduled to phase out in any event, right?
That
So
is what the state, again, I haven't seen anything from the federal government, but New York State is anticipating that, yeah, that's going to phase out over the course of this calendar year. That's correct.
So they're letting us keep the stuff that's going away, and they're going to keep the stuff that seems to be permanent. Have I got that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Okay.
Rich, you have a question?
So I would say there's a figure in the resolution that's before you today that I would suggest ought to be amended. At the time, Norma did give me a chance to look this over, I think a week ago, maybe a little bit longer ago. And at that time, what I thought I understood about the governor's proposal was one thing. Last week, the Department of Health and other state agencies that oversee the Department of Social Services operations provided presentations to counties about their parts of the state budget, and it was only at that time that that we learned about this plan to continue to share the coronavirus-related EFMAP. So in let's see, It's the paragraph in the resolution that says an increase of over $1 million in Medicaid costs during state fiscal 2024.
Right.
If what you want to reflect there is the amount of costs that will, well, the amount of federal reimbursement that is not going to be shared with us, and so the amount of additional local cost during that state fiscal year, I think the figure that we want to use is closer to $1.5 million. It's $1,455,000.
Okay, so.
So that is more than $1 million. So you could leave it as is.
Yeah, but it doesn't quite have the same
Why don't we say-
pizzazz, does it?
Nearly 1.5 million.
Nearly 1.5 million, that sounds, I
Yeah.
take it that's your offer of an amendment, Rich? And, yeah, and Amanda seconds that. So it's nearly 1.5 million.
Yeah.
And what does that?
And that figure is the value of the Affordable Care Act related EF-MAP for a full year that New York State Department of Health most recently communicated to our county about. So that's where that figure comes from.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And while we're at making changes, I noticed that you mentioned that EF-MAP actually stands for Enhanced Federal Medical Assistance Percentage Funds.
Oh, yes, that's right. And I see your title says Medicaid. Yep.
So Taylor, if you would, wherever that appears, it should be medical, not Medicaid. Thank you. All right, does anybody have more questions? Rich, you had a question.
I assume this is subject to the New York State Legislature approving the budget as the governor is proposing it.
Yes.
And my other question is there any move by NISAC or some consortium of counties to sue the state?
To sue them?
Yeah.
Not that I'm aware of. All I know that they're doing is sending out this, they send a template for a resolution and urging all of the member counties to file it. And I guess.
It seems, I'm sorry, I'm just thinking out loud, but it seems like this might be an opportune time to sue on the reconciliation since 2017.
Yeah, we talked, Norma and I talked briefly about adding the reconciliation issue to this resolution, but we decided to just keep it clean and address one thing at a time. I would be all in favor of urging a lawsuit against the state, but, you know, it's not up to me.
Yeah, I mean.
Although we did lead the way on the FOIL request initiative,
Yeah.
so.
Well, if counties got together, it really wouldn't be that expensive, you know. And I did have one follow-up, which was in line 22, the increase in payments to healthcare providers. I assume that wouldn't offset, that wouldn't reduce the county share that
No.
way.
They want to pay the providers more, which is laudable, but.
But not reduce the amount that had to come from us.
Right.
Okay.
I would say, and I would ask if you would consider adding to your proposed amendment on line 21. It says, whereas the state is proposing to keep. I would say, whereas the governor's proposed budget
Yes.
would keep. You got that one, Taylor? Okay. Thank you. All right, any further questions for Tom? Tom, do you feel that you covered everything we need to know? Now, bearing in mind that we don't need to know nearly as much as you do.
Sure. I guess I would say one thing. Up until a couple of weeks ago, I would have been advocating for suing the state regarding its ongoing failure in recent years to finalize reconciliation and settle up EF-MAP, but that was based on a understanding that turns out to have been flawed. For as far back as I can remember, the common understanding, including the understanding that was presented to counties by the State Department of Health was that the federal legislation did require New York State to share EFMAP with counties, again, in proportion to the percentage that counties had been contributing to Medicaid as of whatever base year was. My current understanding, and I believe the state's interpretation of the federal law, is that, in fact, if New York State wanted to, it could increase how much, obviously there have to be a change in state law, but they could increase how much they're requiring counties to contribute, because the statutory cap on contributions has stayed fixed since I think it was 2015, but state Medicaid spending has increased vastly in the interim. So the percentage that counties are now contributing is much, much lower than it was at the time that the Affordable Care Act was passed. So I also would like for our county to get the portions of portions of EFMAP that the state has withheld for the last several years. But I do feel like it's important to note that that EFMAP has been a great good thing, but the state's continued observance of the statutory cap has been even more beneficial to counties.
So although they're two separate issues, your concern is that if we sued them successfully, they would simply raise the cap.
That would be a concern, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Boy. All right. Anything else? Tom, thank you so much. This is such a Byzantine area to understand, and we really appreciate you enlightening us.
You're very welcome.
Okay, so we have a resolution as amended, and we ready to vote? All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you, Taylor. If you got any questions about what the end result was, just let me know. Okay, all right, so now we can move to Resolution E, 2022 Budget Appropriation and Adjustments for Retroactive Salary Adjustments, Employees Union of the Tompkins County Sheriff's Department, ID 11452. Amanda moves, and I'm sure Rich will be, yeah, there he goes. Okay, so this one is the one that Norma and Lisa have promised us we would be confronted with, which is the back pay that we've agreed to in the road patrol contract. And just to clarify, Norma, when you said this comes out of appropriated fund balance, so this is not the general unallocated fund balance. This is money that we've put aside over the years? No?
This is coming out of the fund balance. Yeah, this is not part of the negotiated salary line because that was taken up by the negotiations themselves. That was the, the actual salary increases. This is the retroactive pay, which was not included in the budget.
So this is a $2.5 million hit to
the fund balance.
To the general fund balance.
Yes.
I thought we had reserves for that. No?
I did too, but
The reserves that were budgeted in previous years were used up for the I'm sorry, not for the retroactive, but for the negotiated salaries.
prospective salaries.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
This surprises me, because I thought a reserve would be an ongoing thing for each of the years where they were out of contract. But no?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Because I'd asked that question before, I
Drew just popped up on the screen. He
believe.
may have some other information.
Yeah.
Hi, Drew.
I thought we had reserves.
Drew has more history here than I do right now, so I'll let him.
Yeah, and I dimly remember asking this question.
Yeah, and it was my understanding that there was money set aside for retroactive payments under contracts, but maybe Drew can clarify this.
There was some, good afternoon, thank you, Deborah. There was some set aside in amounts, but as Norma indicated, I know she talked with Rick a little bit and there were some emails back and forth before he left the office as far as where these amounts were and how much they were. So I'm not sure the full amounts were reserved or not. And I haven't had a chance to dig too deeply into it because I'd have to understand the whole thing as well. So,
Okay, well, here's what I'm going to suggest. We have to dish this money out anyway. I mean, we've approved a contract. We've got to fork it over. I would ask that before this resolution goes to the full legislature at our next meeting, that somebody can explain to us exactly where it's coming from, just to clarify the misunderstanding. Because I shared your misapprehension, Rich. I thought that we had been told that money had been set aside for these retro pays. So,
yeah, I think Norma is correct that those were used up, but what they were used up for exactly is what we'll have to figure out. So.
Well, it was for the salary adjustments, for the multi-year salary adjustment that took place. And I will tell you, too, while we're having the conversation, the same thing is going to happen when corrections is done.
okay. Boy, it's
Not to, but to be clear, that the salary, the anticipated salary increases have been built into the budget. It's just the retroactive payments that we're talking about. Okay.
While we're on this, I guess I would like to understand better what's happening whenever a bargaining unit goes out of contract. What is our policy on setting up reserves? Because I thought we had one, and it sounds like we haven't been doing that. And that, I'm not an accountant, but that seems to be good accounting practice to make sure that we're not doing resolutions like this one. You're nodding, yes?
I'm hearing you. I will have an answer for you.
Thanks, okay.
Yes.
We'll still
The
need,
best I can tell you right now, yep.
we will still need resolutions. It'll just be a question of where the money's coming from and be sure that we understand that. Because another piece of this is that, as I recall, I was given to understand the money was there when we discussed approving the contract. You know, not that it would have made a heck of a lot of difference, but it would have been nice to know that what we were approving was a $2.5 million hit to our overall general fund. So, yay. Okay. Are we ready to vote on this one?
I thought we did.
I thought we did, yeah. Okay. I know, you've moved so many. All right, all in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you, people. And then the next one is Resolution F, appropriation from Contingent Fund for Southside and Reach contracts, ID 11404. And Amanda moves it, Rich seconds. Okay, you want to tell us about this one, Norma?
So I apologize, I was writing a note to make sure I follow up on that. The policy, so you have been, the REACH, both REACH and the other, I'm sorry, can I look at that, because my Southside were set aside in the contingent fund during the budget process. Right now,
Was this one of our many OTs?
those were one of the many
Okay.
things that came to the floor without a designation of where they were going to be handled. So I've spoken with the Human Services Coalition as well as mental health, and both of those departments will be taking over the responsibility and the budget oversight for those two programs. So that's what this is.
All right. Any other questions?
Print this out next time.
All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you. And then we're going to do the appropriation from Contingent Fund Terminal Pay, Department of Probation and Criminal Justice, ID 11458. Rich moves, Amanda seconds. this is routine when someone leaves. So any questions or discussion?
Wait, which one are we doing?
This is the one on packet page 40. Okay, all in favor? That's unanimous. Okay, thank you.
I'm
Now-
sorry, a mover and a seconder.
Yeah. Okay, so, no, let's move back to the resolution to update the administrative policy manual. So, Amanda, you and I talked about this, but if you want to, I'll let you take the lead on the concerns that we discussed.
Okay.
But I guess we should move it first.
Yeah.
Amanda moves, Rich seconds, and now we will discuss it, led by Amanda.
Sure, okay, well, so there's 3 policies. Well, so my first question, just the standards of conduct, we're just getting rid of that?
Well, according to the resolution, it says that that content is covered in other county policies.
Okay. But we don't have specifically a standard of, like, it's just generally in other places?
I'm assuming so. That wasn't one under personnel
Okay.
or human resources.
All right, well, I'll
Because
trust,
it's all deleted, I'm assuming it was in another policy.
okay. But then the one that I and Deborah had talked about with questions was the hiring and processing new employees. And so several things. I think that, so on page 15, under policy, it references the implicit bias training. And I think maybe we want to add that in under definitions, because it's not referenced anywhere else in this policy. And I don't know, it just seems like something that would be easy enough to add the definition. Okay. And then, so my other question, when you get to the procedure section, so under number 2, there's a section for if there's a civil service and then if there's not. But I feel like some of those, like that description is then just sort of reviewed in Part B. I don't know, it felt redundant.
Some of the steps are the same. So if there is a civil service list, there are a couple of things at the top, at the front, that you have to do to check the list.
Right.
But to get them onboarded, it's the same process following that, once
So-
you're posted.
Yeah, so I guess I just wonder, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking it, but like, if there is a valid civil service list, it says number A, to conduct interview selection process based on your reachable candidates, check references, maybe just saying as outlined in section B. I don't know, because it just makes it sound like just do all these things and it's really simple and.
We're trying to make it simple.
Right.
So, okay, so what we could do, if that section is in B, we can say it as outlined in section A. So it should be outlined first and then referred to.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, all right, that makes sense.
Can I throw something in here?
Yeah, about the reachable.
Yeah, you know, the section 2A, 2 little I refers to reachable candidates. Okay?
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that that's civil service law tells you who you can reach and
Right.
who you can't. I think it would be good to just say something like, talk about listed candidates who are reachable pursuant to, and then put the civil service regulation or whatever it is, so people understand what that means.
Okay, so repeat that again.
You talk about reachable candidates. I would change that to listed candidates who are reachable pursuant to, and then just put what the civil service law is.
Okay. The reference.
Right, because if you,
Reference, because otherwise, somebody's reading this thing wondering.
what does reachable
What the
mean?
heck is a reachable candidate?
Yeah. It took-
Most
Well, it
people.
took me a long time to figure out what that meant.
Oh, okay.
Or, I mean, when I first got this job, I was like, what does reachable mean?
Okay.
Okay, and then my other just sort of personal thing on policies is I don't personally like when you actually add the link, because the links change and references change. I don't know. I mean, so there's a couple of links on page 18 that it lists, where to find it, but do you need to also put the link? Because the next time this comes around to be updated, it could be in 5 years and we have a new website and it's a different link.
And we change the links. We
Okay.
change the links when we make revisions.
Okay.
So some of the links are referred to in an appendix. We also included the forms.
Right.
So it's easier to click a link and go to the policy than to tell someone to go through 5 or
Right.
6 different pages of the HR
Okay.
website.
I guess I have a question there. Do you have an index of all the links and all the policies so that when there's a change to a link, you know where it's referenced? That makes sense?
An index.
Okay.
But when the policy is revised, that link is revised. We have an archive of all the files that we remove and then the new ones. So I guess in a way, we do have an index. But if you want us to provide an index so it can say, okay, hiring policy.
No, I don't want to make
using-
work for you, but I was just curious, how do you work backwards that if a link gets changed, you know where you're
Have
referencing
a
it?
site index. I would assume there's a site index for it.
Yeah, I think he's just trying
I have
to
the
make it
policy.
easier for you.
That makes sense.
Drew, did you have something?
Yeah, actually, I think I know the answer. Each week, we do an audit of all the county websites, and since these appear on the websites, each department gets a report of any broken links that are not currently functioning. ITS actually arranges that through a third-party contractor.
That's helpful.
That's cool. Thank you.
Yeah, so each week I get a report on the finance website that says, these links work, these don't. Yeah, it gets at what you're
So
discussing.
no index, you don't need one, you've solved it. Good, okay.
Outstanding.
That means our links were correct. We haven't received that report.
Okay, then I have one last question. Also on page 18, at the end of the policy, number 3, that the 3 things listed that must be turned in to the Department of Human Resources, and one is immigration form. And I mean, does everybody have that? Or like, I don't have that.
I-9s are required for all employees,
Okay,
and it's part of their onboarding process. It's in their packet.
okay. So a seasonal person still has to fill that out and send it in?
Within a certain length, right.
Okay, got it.
Okay, I've got a couple more.
Okay.
And if it makes you feel better, this has to go through GO, so.
Oh, that's
you know,
fine.
We'll just
do it
make-
again.
We'll just do it now. So section 2C,
Page,
that is on page 15, well, yeah. It says, department heads not familiar with interview procedures such as establishing search panels and implicit bias training shall consult with HR. Okay. But then, if you go to page 17, when it talks about interviews and candidate selection, it doesn't say anything about implicit bias training or.
Right.
I think that's being given just as an example. It says such as establishing search
But
panels.
if you read section 2B, it talks about department heads can begin to interview candidates once the applications have been received. And then it says, once they've been conducted and a final candidate has been selected, the department head can go ahead and basically initiate the hiring process. And I should think that if our hiring process is required to include the training and a search committee.
Some of the hirings don't require search procedures as far as search committee. If it's a civil service list, you have the top 3 that you choose from. You don't have to conduct interviews. So what we were assuming in the interview and candidate selection process is that you've already had your preliminary meeting with HR and gone through what exactly you need, whether it's information regarding a search panel or implicit bias, or whether you can go directly to the list and hire from the list.
I just
So
want
we're trying to do it in order. So, but we can do another such as. But at that point, you should already know whether you've done A, C in the beginning.
Okay, well, if it would be too unwieldy, then we don't need to bother with it. I just it raised a question in my mind. And then the other thing is, the ban the box references. There are several of them. You define ban the box on page 15, just as a policy generally. And then you talk about, in various places, successful completion and approval of ban the box. And the meaning of those phrases is implied, but it's not defined. For example, under B on page 17, under B2A, talk about if the candidate indicates a past or pending conviction, and then you go on. And I would just suggest that you add at the end, otherwise Human Resources provides ban the box approval. And then that's clear. What that approval or successful completion actually means. And I know this sounds really picky, but if we get a new department head who's looking at this for the first time, I want to be sure they don't have any excuse for not understanding what you're telling them. And then the only other thing is just sort of an editorial thing. Sometimes ban the box is capitalized and sometimes it's not, and it's just kind of haphazard, and I think that's just not.
You're channeling Dooley on that one.
No, I'm channeling 35 years of writing briefs is what I'm channeling, but anyway.
Okay.
That's all I got. Now, I don't know
ask
how.
one other question?
Okay.
Do department heads have to go through implicit bias training? Like, are they trained how to hire people? If there's no search committee, which, we've all been on numerous search committees where we go through that, and department heads are often there, but.
Not in every search.
Okay.
Not in every search. When a position is posted and we talk with the department, it depends on the type of search that is being conducted.
Right.
So anything that's going through HR and HR is facilitating, we have the implicit bias training. If you're going through a list or the civil service process, not necessarily. We do provide training upon request if there are questions, and we get emails back and forth, that kind of things, on specific questions. But it's not required across the board for all searches.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So now the question is, how do we proceed in terms of process? Because we suggested changes we want to make. But I don't know that we've.
The way we usually do it in GO is that whoever is taking notes, these 3 lovely people, I think we've agreed on what we should change and what doesn't need changing. They'll go ahead and make those, and we can vote on this, and it will still go to GO. So Rich and I will read it again.
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah.
Okay.
But so there was 3, so there was also the workers' compensation. I didn't have anything on that.
I didn't have anything on that one either.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry we're so picky, Ruby.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Okay. All right. Anything else on this? Rich? Okay, are we ready to vote? All right. All in favor? And that's unanimous and
Yeah, thank you.
accommodating our concerns.
We do have Mike Lane present virtually.
Oh,
Okay, so, do I want to what? Well, can he vote on that? Does he have, I thought he could vote if he had a reason that falls within the new policy. I'm just. No, he can vote. He can vote? Okay, Mike, you want to vote?
Happy to vote yes.
Okay. There we go. So now, let's see. We have committee chair report. I'm going to just hold off until we move to our discussion of our goals for the year, and we will let Veronica tell us about WDIC.
Oh, sorry. I thought that sentence was going in the direction of you were wanting to hold off on.
No, I don't have anything, but you're also a committee chair, so
yes,
go for it.
okay. Great. Well, WDIC has, I guess I've reported at full legislature since the last time we met, but our next meeting, we're going to be figuring out our own goals, so maybe this is related. I guess our recent update from the last meeting is that we did some intense work editing our bylaws, which is exciting because they hadn't been touched in a decade. It does seem. One of the things, it was a lot of just like updating language to match other stuff. And one thing we did do was, so these bylaws haven't been approved yet, or, you'll see them in a couple months. But one thing we did do was change the number of members of the committee to 13, as in a specific number where it had been a range, which means that I believe after Nick's appointment that y'all just approved goes through, we will have one vacancy remaining instead of an unclear number, which is pretty cool. Going forward, so I think we're going to have like an open discussion about our goals at this. Our next meeting is a week from this Wednesday. But some things from last year that are like likely going to be big are continuing to help with the values and diversity statement rollout throughout our whole big organization. We had talked about looking at the ADA compliance or like the sort of accessibility status, both like bare minimum ADA compliance and beyond that of our facilities, which at least is on the table as a maybe. Doing another workplace climate survey, although that would have to intersect with our county's strategic plan, and I don't quite know where that is. And something relating to the responding to the results of the compensation survey, which I'm also quite not sure where that is. So I know this is my time to update you all, but if there's room for it, I have lots of questions. Yes.
Well, I think Ruby's probably best situated to do that.
Yeah, that's one of them.
So I was going to include that in my report, but I will do it now. We did receive the initial report from the vendors, but we reviewed and asked them to go back and make some clarifications, corrections, and revisions. So when we get those done, and we also asked them to add some of the rates from various towns, surrounding towns, because they were comparing it to counties and those peer groups that we selected and the market rate. And we specifically wanted to know about some of the towns. So when we get that information, we'll be providing it to Budget, Capital, and Personnel and going from there. I imagine it's going to have to go through several legislative processes before we come up with the recommendations and the solutions.
Sure, that makes sense.
And in terms of the climate survey, I thought, it was my understanding that that was scheduled to be updated.
It was. At the time, we had a Chief Equity Diversity Officer and HR. We were going to join forces and do the climate survey. We are searching for the Chief Equity and Diversity Officer. So as soon as we get that candidate in place, then we will start doing some scheduling. It probably won't be this year.
Yeah, I heard
For the simple,
2024.
right, for the simple reason that we'll have someone new in that role. They'll be adjusting to being in that role. And maybe by then we will have some of the other things in place. So 2024, I think, is when we can realistically look to implement that again.
That makes sense. So would it make sense to work on planning for it only once the new Chief Equity and Diversity Officer has started?
I think so, because that will be the chief official responsible for doing it. HR will assist, but it will fall under the Chief Equity and Diversity Officer. JEDI has some portion of it. I imagine WDIC as well. But what I've started doing earlier was looking through some of the questions that were asked on the 2018 survey and started revising and adding some things. So that might be something the committee would like to look into.
Okay, yeah, and probably, I'll follow up with you on that.
I'll provide that to you.
Yeah. One related question is, we kept talking about how the climate survey being a part of the diversity plan that's be a part of the county strategic plan, and this may just be a brain hole on my part, but I've lost track of what the status of creating a strategic plan is and how that works.
We did RFP, we interviewed vendors. I think one was selected. We're waiting for the funds to come in.
Just found out about funds, and a resolution is being crafted for that. So it's been a timing thing, but it's coming.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so I have questions from Mike Lane and Annie.
Thanks, and thanks, Veronica, for your report. I was just wondering about the timing of these studies. Seems to me that we shouldn't go ahead with another climate survey until after we've got results from the compensation study.
It sounds like it's going to turn out that way, just in the natural evolution of things. So, but thank you. Annie?
Thanks for letting me ask a question. It was just a quick one for Ruby. And when you mentioned for the compensation study to make sure they're checking with local towns, is the city of Ithaca already included in that?
Yes, the city of Ithaca was one of our peer groups that we asked them to review.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so I noticed that in my hurry to get through things, I skipped over the Director of Finance report, and I guess the Human Resources Commissioner report is next. Drew, I'm going to ask that we hold off on your report till we get to discussing committee goals, because budget and general and fund balance are a big part of our discussion, and you have things to contribute, okay?
Absolutely.
All right, so
Deborah?
Ruby,
I
sorry.
did have a question. Do we need to add this to the agenda?
We already did.
Did we do that? I don't remember voting it.
I asked if we had to vote on it, but we don't, because it came from a department and not.
Okay.
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 All right, so is that everything, Veronica?
I guess I have one request as we think about the values and diversity statement rollout is, I think those of us on WDIC and within this organization otherwise have our brains full of that a good chunk of the time, but maybe other folks don't. And so any feedback on how the values and things are landing, whether, from Ruby or other things, is probably helpful, not necessarily here, even if it's people don't even know what I'm talking about when I say that.
I do believe there was a preliminary rollout of the values last year. I'll have to go back and research exactly. I know we put them on the websites and things like that, but there was no pomp and circumstance. Here are our values. So I can show you what we've done.
We could have a coronation celebration
Yeah. I mean, I know, They've been rolled out. There's posters, there's cards, there's
Right.
all sorts of things.
And
But I'm also,
those values are on our performance evaluation tools.
right, yeah. I'd be curious if it's like, despite that, there's like, oh, a whole half a department of, hopefully this isn't the case, of people like couldn't tell you what they are.
You can lead a horse to water, Veronica. Okay, all right.
Repetition.
Repetition, yeah. What have you got for us, Ruby, other than?
I will finish this. Search is underway. The Chief Equity and Diversity Officer, we have scheduled interviews for next week. Director of Finance application period ended yesterday. We will be scheduling application review and following up with interviews. The Homeless Services Coordinator's deadline is February the 26th. HR has been busy coming up with an expedited onboarding process to meet the critical needs in the Sheriff's Office for corrections officers. And since last week, the legislative actions of last week, there are 10 applications, new applications.
Whoa.
So it's working. And then we've talked about the compensation study, and that was, the last thing was our goals after our initial conversation regarding goals for BCP. I submitted department goals to the county administrator that basically aligns with those goals. And I just want to read them out here. Priority goals for 2023, complete the HR process review and implementation with IATS. That deals with the workflow, the routing, the access, records management, and also includes some of the conversation you were talking about as far as position classification. The second priority is the training and implementation of the countywide performance evaluation program for employees and following legislative direct reports. We had our first overview of the performance evaluation program for department heads last Thursday. There were maybe over 30 people attending, so it's a good response. The third goal is implementation of, I'm calling it phase 2 of the compensation analysis, which deals again with position classification, reclassification, or restructuring as needed. And 4, develop the process to retrieve and report demographic data from our UKG system, which we've been having issues with. And the other ones are simply continuous goals of what we do on a daily basis.
Would you mind very much just sending that to us, because you talk fast. Not as fast as our former Chief Equity and Diversity Officer, but fast.
I will.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Ruby on any of that? All right, then. Let us take care of our remaining resolutions, and then we will talk about our committee goals. So we have a resolution to approve a funding agreement with NISDOT for Fall Creek Road Bridge, bin 3314130 over Fall Creek Rehabilitation Project, pin 3756.19, town of Dryden, ID 11430. Say that 3 times fast. Amanda moves it. Rich seconds. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, I guess I'll have to call the roll because Mike's not here. So we'll start with Mike.
Yes?
Rich?
Yes.
Amanda?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Thank you. And then the next one, I think, is about the same bridge project. Budget adjustment transfer from HQ Fund Capital Reserve to Fall Creek Road Bridge, bin 3314130 over Fall Creek Rehabilitation Project, pin 3756.19, town of Dryden, HZ 5153, project 51.53, ID 11433. Can I get a motion? Amanda, Rich seconds. Any discussion? All right, Mike?
Yes?
Rich?
Yes.
Amanda?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay, and then the final thing we have is this resolution that was added today. Resolution ID 11453, budget adjustment, acceptance of New York State healthcare worker bonus, HWB funding, vesting periods 1 and 2. Rich moves, Amanda seconds. Is this another one? I mean, didn't we already have one of these for the mental health people?
Oh, yes, you did. Yes, that's another one.
Okay, so
Yes.
this is, okay, so this is not going to have, wait, I'm trying to figure out, does this have any actual budget impact on us, or is this just money flowing through
pass-through.
from the state?
Yeah, these are pass-through funds.
I will support this and vote in favor of it, but I think this is terrible government. It's one-time money. It seems to be, there's some laudatory things in here in that these are deserving people, but there's a real arbitrary element to it. And it's gifting, I think, to some employees and not to others, and suggesting that some county workers are
More valuable than others.
are more valuable than others, and I don't want to send that message at all. But I certainly don't want to deny anybody a chance to get some extra scratch. But New York State should not be proceeding in this manner. This is not helpful in that it is a single one-time payment, and I don't know. We're not in a pandemic really right now. We're not under tremendous stress. It is a use of public funds that I don't think is well thought out. Thanks.
I hear what you're saying. I wouldn't go so far as to say we're not under tremendous stress. I think, from much of what I read and see, a lot of people, healthcare providers, are still under a lot
we're not
of
under different stress than we have been under, and I don't know it's confined to these employees.
Yeah.
But I will support it.
Oh, I will too. I mean, I'm not going to withhold money that the state wants to give our workers, but I take your point. Whether the state realizes it or not, this is sending an unfortunate message to the employees who stuck with us throughout the pandemic and aren't getting a bonus. So, Drew?
The only thing I'd like to add is the state is paying the wages and a portion of the FICA, but they are not paying things like workers' compensation, New York State retirement portions, any other contributions we have to make on theirs. So there will be additional costs down the road besides what they're reimbursing us.
So another unfunded mandate. Oh my goodness, I should start counting them, and it's only February. Thanks for that, Drew. Okay.
I think Mike had his hand up.
Mike?
No, I was making the exact same comment Deb just did.
Yeah. Okay, so are we ready to vote on this? Mike?
Yes.
Rich?
Yes.
Amanda?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. Okay, that passes. So now we can move on. Let's get Drew's report, and that will segue us nicely into our committee goals discussion.
So I'll do this hopefully in the right order for you, Deborah. Thank you very much. Just one thing I promised this committee on each committee meeting that we would do is an update on our investments. That's with the New York class program. As of the end of the year, we had $25 million invested with them. We reviewed where we were at cash-wise and diversity-wise, and we did add $5 million to New York class at the end of January. That brought us to a total of $30 million there. That's about as much as we can, so we don't have a great percentage with them versus other banks. And the current rate is 4.36 as of this morning. So we have 30 million there, getting 4.36. As we start collecting tax dollars, we might be able to do a little more, but also we'll be looking at kicking off our building projects from road and bridge projects and stuff as the weather gets nicer, although it can't get much nicer than today. So, so we'll be using up some of that money and taking some out. So I just wanted to put that out there. Updates from finance. We are recruiting, thanks to HR, for a purchasing assistant now. As you recall, that was part of the budget. Also, there is an accounting position for an accountant, and Daryl, our director of accounting, has been working with HR, and that'll be posted in the very near future. We are going to work with administration and facilities as far as some space, because we're at the point we'll probably be sharing offices if we don't find some other space. But Arel and Lisa Holmes and I did do a building walkthrough a few weeks ago, and we just need to follow up on that, so to let them know. And then I think this is the greatest part that Deb wanted me to lead into. So it's a little discussion on the fund balance. I've recently gotten some documents from Moody's. We talked about this before as we got our Moody's rating. Our current fund balance, they look at three things from a Moody's investment responsibility. They look at what our actual cash balance is, what our true fund balance is, and then what the fund balance policy is. And they said that our current fund balance and cash balance are both all right. They didn't go to the point of saying they were good compared to counties across the United States that they rate a AA1 rating, which we have, or better. We're right in the mix of that with our current fund balance. They did ding us a little because our fund balance policy is much less than our current fund balance. So the realistic possibility that we could spend that fund balance quickly. They have, since that meeting, sent me some documentations in the last couple of weeks. I haven't had a chance to go through and review those. I apologize. But I did talk with Deb a little bit, and before the end of November or the end of February, so we can discuss it at the March BCP meeting, I can do a memo and summarize their items and send those out to this committee to see if there is any change you want to do to our fund balance policy. Again, we're trying not only to keep that rating up there, but keep our borrowing costs low, and just, you know, keep Tompkins County at the top of the list if we can.
Thank you.
And any questions or anything else you'd like me to add to that, Deborah?
Yeah, you mentioned to me this morning when we spoke, Drew, that Moody's was going to move us to a AA2, and
yes,
you talked them out of it. So, you know, yes, we enjoy a AA1, but we can't take that for granted. And, you know, we as a group in the last couple of months have discussed the fund balance. Some might say ad nauseum, but generally there was an appetite for reconsidering the fund balance policy. And I think that is going to be important if we want to keep that rating. And the information that you'll be able to bring to us next month, Drew, will help us a lot in figuring out where we want to go with that.
Yeah. Susan from Moody's pointed out something which just wowed me. They recently re-rated Cornell, and Cornell kept their AA1 rating as well. And she said, you know, when they look at the ratings, they look at the possibility to pay back, and fund balance is one of those items. But also, you know, your average income and that stuff around the community and the county is part of that as well. And because of their new rating schedule, they should have lowered ours a little bit. They did move the city of Ithaca. I looked after the last ledge meeting, and when we had that discussion with them, they did move them from a AA3 to a AA4 rating. And where I was going with Cornell is sitting on over $9 billion of endowment. Now, a lot of that is restricted, but it could still, much of it could still be used to pay their bonds. But even because of that, and because of the community and everything else they look at, they did only rate Cornell as a AA1. So I think we were lucky to keep it at a AA1 rating. And she mentioned at that time, I said, well, what do other counties have? And she said, similar to what we have that we're sitting on is 40 to 50% of budgeted revenues as a fund balance. But again, she did send me a lot of their backup and their research papers. She sent 2 research papers for me to go through, and I'll go through those over the next couple of weeks and do a summary to this committee on that.
If there's anything in there that's in English understandable to people without an accounting background, please feel free to share them with us.
Oh, I'll definitely share the 2 documents with you as well, but I'll try and do a summary 1-pager.
Thanks, Drew. Rich has a question for you.
Along those lines of making it understandable, would you be able to say what the difference would be roughly in interest rate going from AA1 to AA2 or AA1 to AA4? I think this is something the public doesn't really understand, but it's meaningful.
Each subgrade is almost 0.25% interest rate. So on the 20-year bonds that we just issued, if we got net rate is about 3.25, it would have been about 3.5. And my understanding, I haven't run the calculations, but that would have cost us over $100,000 each year to fund those if we did get that 0.25 point increase. So it can be significant. When you drop from a AA subrating to a double B or triple B, then you're looking at full percentage point increases. So,
Whoa.
which is very significant right now. So, and part of the good news on the timing of the bond market, I did just get an email today from financial advisors in Syracuse that handles ours, is we must have timed it just right. They did another AA1 rating that came out almost 0.6% higher than what we had last week. So
I would assume if interest rates go up that spread would increase as well. Is that true or no?
I think that is a good assumption. You never know until you go to market. So.
So have we issued all the bonds and bands and RANs that we're going to do for this year?
We have issued all of them, yes. So we got a very good percentage. We got 3.25 on the bonds, and we got 3.5 almost on the bands, the 1-year notes.
Okay.
So.
Well, hopefully by next year, the Fed will be done with whatever the heck it is they think they're doing.
Yes, hopefully markets will settle down and we'll be in a good spot, so.
Okay, thank you. All right, so that brings us to a discussion of our goals for the year. And I reviewed last month's meeting, and what I ended up with is we're going to review our fund balance policy. There was a discussion about the use of the word review for several of these policies because we wanted to engage in a process that allows us to educate ourselves, educate anybody who happens to be watching our meetings, and decide whether we want to change things while we're not necessarily committed to changing anything. So bear that in mind as I go through these. We wanted to review the fund balance policy. We wanted to review the sales tax agreement. Lisa suggested that we would also be reviewing the fiscal policy, but only after administration comes up with any updates to changes they want to make. We are going to be working with Ruby and HR to develop a better direct report evaluation process. We want to work closely with Norma and administration in general and whoever our new finance or budget director is to come up with improvements to our budget process. So in connection with that, Norma, you came up with something that you sent to me and Lee, who unfortunately isn't here. I don't know if you want to discuss this with us. I've got the email that I think it would be optimal to have you lead this discussion because it's your process in a lot of ways.
Okay. I just want to follow up very quickly on the budget question that you had earlier related to the negotiated salaries. Those have been in the budget since 2018, so there is money. I just don't know exactly how Rick has categorized it within the fund balance, which is one of the things we need to work on. But yes, it was.
There is money there.
I wanted you to know that before
Thank
the day
you.
was
I feel
over.
much better.
Well, and it said.
And there is enough.
Okay.
It said in the resolution that they used, the resolution says appropriated fund balance, so I kind of wondered why it wouldn't just be in the general fund balance.
So thank you for checking.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Norma.
Sure. So I drew on my previous experience working at the county back when Michael remembers when I was here before. So, and I was kind of going over some of the processes that took place this year and the way some of the amendments came in and such. And just had a couple of kind of general thoughts. Potentially looking at when program changes or when amendments are being considered, those changes taking place preferably through within the cooperation of the department and the agency and within the program committee. So rather than kind of at the end of the year doing program changes, looking at considering what needs of the community we have and working through those throughout the year rather than being a budget time to make changes. So that's one of the things that I had considered or would like you to consider. There should be some understanding about when the discussions and timelines since the budget retreat in April informs the fiscal target and how the whole budget process goes. So making sure that we have time to plan for this even while we're building a fiscal target. Having the legislature state the policy goal that they want to achieve and ask administration to work with the departments to analyze what it'll take to achieve that goal. So for example, if you want to add 2 FTEs to a department, what does that mean to that particular department and how can we help them through that process change? And in the absence of a strategic plan, the program committee could set some focus goals that would help them consider funding priorities. So maybe putting some of these responsibilities back on the program committee to inform how the budget is built. The strategic plan is going to help the legislature create the priorities and maybe consider balancing the changes, but right now in the absence of that, maybe having that.
Wait, could you run that one by me again? The last sentence.
In the absence of having a strategic plan.
Right, okay.
Utilizing the program committee and helping us to develop some goals and priorities. And then set expectations that the agencies and department need, that they ask for what they need, This will be particularly true given the opportunity to discuss changes throughout the year in program committee. So then the legislature will only have to review the over-target requests that are in the book rather than having to create or bringing forward any new ones during the budget process. So those were my thoughts.
And I will say, if you all read the emails that Norma sent us, I think you sent them to the entire legislature about the results of your survey.
Yes, a while back, yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of the things that you've incorporated in these recommendations
Came from the
directly
departments
from
as well.
that survey. So I do think this is something that we're going to have to do some work on in this committee, and as we discussed last month, sooner rather than later, because, you know, April's going to be upon us in no time. And we may not this year be able to implement everything in time for the budget retreat, but we ought to make as good a start on it as we can, because I simply do not want to see the kind of dumpster fire we had last year.
Although we managed it. We did manage it.
We did manage it.
I mean, and our meetings were shorter this past budget cycle than the year before.
It's not a question of how long the meetings were, Rich. It's a question of what came out of the meetings. And what came out of those meetings was just a hailstorm
Of new,
OTRs that
Yes.
got pulled out of people's left ears. And that's not a budget process, that's chaos.
I certainly agree with that. We did manage it, but it would make sense to do something more structured. And I'm thinking, to your point, maybe we could do something on an informal basis this year to sort of test the waters, that either out of from individual legislators or from the separate committees in connection with our April retreat, we start to at least sketch out what we think will be the budget demands or asks. I'm thinking, as an example, we've allocated a position in Department of Emergency Response for a EMS coordinator. It's quite likely that it'll work towards some proposal for the county to have fly cars. And we probably could start talking about that in very general terms in April without knowing whether we're going to get there or not, but it'd be far better for us to have an understanding of it in April rather than November. So I agree with you.
Well, if we just engaged in a process whereby everybody laid out all these things at one time in one place, all these things that are hanging over us that are going to have to be taken care of. Because what happens is we tend to deal with them seriatim and separately. And so nobody is focusing on the big picture and how much it's all going to add up to. And if we focused on the big picture and how much it was going to add up to, we would be in a position where we would understand the need to prioritize, which is something we don't seem to do.
I think you're an optimist, but
Yeah, maybe. Or we could always just have mud wrestling to see who. Yeah. Mike, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I think what you're saying, Deb, is right. And we need to try to get a handle on this. I think we have to look to administration to take the lead on that. You know, it comes time to, for positions, for example, when it comes time to retract or we have some extra money to use, we look to administration for advice on that. I think for our budget retreat, there ought to be a section when we talk about that and say, and give direction to our administrator and our budget director as to what we want. And, you know, if we want to say last year was nice, but we can't do it again, or you know, we're rich and let's add some more positions, or whatever we want to decide, I think it should be done starting then.
I agree. I mean, that was that was my thought about this from the beginning. And I think perhaps, if it's all right with you, members of the committee, when I report on budget, capital, and personnel at our next legislature meeting, I will bring up this exact issue and ask that individual legislators, groups of legislators, program committees, if there's something that they want to see in next year's budget, the time to bring that up is, in the first instance, is at our budget retreat. Don't leave it until September, because by that time, we're 4 or 5 months into the budget process. And in terms of, facilitating a good planning and process for our departments, the ship has sailed. So, yeah. Rich?
Yeah, I agree with you that this is a worthwhile priority for this committee. And what I might suggest is that you give that direction, but at our March meeting, we devote some time to this subject.
Absolutely.
So that we could give clear direction to the legislators what we expect them to do at the budget retreat or before.
And they'll just ignore it, but
Well, they might.
At least we will.
But this is our break-in year. This would be
Yeah.
the informal process. But I think that would be an agenda item for March.
I agree. And I think this will be a good time to do it because we still have, a substantial number of relatively new legislators who I would hope have sown their wild oats in last year's budget process and are now ready to knuckle down and follow a disciplined process. So that's me being optimistic, and I'm really sorry that Mr. Mezzi isn't here to see it. All right. Yes, please.
Right. I think just to clarify, maybe telling people that to change your frame of reference where we're not really bringing, I suppose it's still possible. You could bring your OTRs in September, but to think about the OTRs now in the spring or even into early summer, and versus waiting until the end. And I think it would just be a switch in
It's timing. It's
timing.
Yes.
But yeah, just reiterating.
And I acknowledge that there are going to be emergencies, problems, things that become acute or new problems that arise that we can't necessarily predict in April. But I think as a general rule, the stuff that came up last budget cycle, none of it was a surprise.
And all that stuff could, in theory, just kind of wait until the next spring, until the next April to be included in the actual discussion of the next budget.
Yeah, I guess I'm just asking for people to try planning ahead and be more disciplined. Norma's.
Yeah, well, I was just, so, the legislators are the policymakers, and we're the ones who administer those policies and those decisions. So if you're increasing or decreasing programs, so I don't know whether there's been a time where you've had kind of a survey of the leadership to see what type of policies or what type of changes they want to see, what are the priorities for the year, and then county administration and departments could look for ways to, fulfill those wishes and maybe make some proposals about how that might happen unless there's something very direct like what you were talking about with emergency response. So that's all. There's the difference between what the legislators do in making policy and what county administration and departments do, and that is to see that policy through.
And what happened with all those OTRs was we weren't making policy, we were just picking little projects that we wanted to fund over and above the budget to implement what we thought our policies were. And that's just not the way this should happen. Anyway. All right, so we've got 2 items, Taylor, that we need to discuss at some length at our next meeting. And one is getting started on this budget process thing. And the second one is Drew's going to get back to us on the fund balance policy, so we can start that discussion. You had your hand up, Rick.
I did. I was just going to comment. The sales tax formula, I think maybe we take that off as a priority for this year. I think trying to revise our budget process is pretty ambitious.
Well, the sales tax thing was just a review so that we understood what the situation was, and it won't be a high priority goal. I hate to just take it off our list entirely.
If it's a review,
Yeah.
I think that's fine. I just worry that.
We don't, I know.
Donnybrook comes to mind as a word.
Well, as Mike pointed out at our last meeting, and Lee as well, there's a lot of history there that we don't understand. And our review may simply end up better enabling us to understand why it is the way it is. I get that a lot of people do not want to touch it.
I did have another potential priority to put on the floor, which would be evaluating our grant process. We put money in the budget this year to expand our grant hunting and applications. I'd love for us to have some metrics around that, to look at baseline, where we have been in terms of budgets or grant applications, and also our success rate, dollar figures, and then trying to figure out perhaps administration cost as a historical baseline, and then trying to figure out, are we doing better now? I'd also love to see some connection between what we do with our grants and the county department priorities that Lisa shared with us, so that we're looking to see whether we're being effective in trying to accomplish these departmental priorities through grants. And it would seem to be a way for us to focus our attention. But I'd like to do that in an organized way, and maybe this goes to GO, because GO, county administration reports there, but I think it's better placed here in that.
Deb wants to do it.
And Amanda doesn't.
But since we put money in our budget, I would hate for us to just say, okay, we've won the war. I'd like us to be looking and saying, was that money well spent?
Well,
speaking of OTRs.
I will say though, that I think one of the reasons that we put that position in admin was because admin would be in the best position to determine which grants to go after, because they are the grants that are in sync with departmental policies. I mean, I don't assume you're going to have somebody off there chasing grants on something that no department really is interested in, are you? I mean.
Yeah, but from our standpoint, I mean, noses in, fingers out. We should just be making sure.
Wait, what?
You never heard that expression?
No.
No, noses in means you're looking, you're paying attention, but fingers out, you're not interfering.
Oh.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
I won't even tell you where.
That's an expression about boards of directors, that they're not supposed to be involved in operations, but they should know. They should be nosy. And I think we should be on this one, because my recollection, was it 100 or 120K?
100.
Okay, 100K we put into this, and it's brand new. Somebody should be watching to say, was this a stupid idea? Did this make sense to do this? Are we getting real?
Wasn't this your idea?
It was my idea, yeah.
Well, you're on both GO and BCP. So.
Yeah, so I could see it either place, but I think it's better placed in budget. And I would really like to know that this made a difference. And if we establish the baseline metrics and we didn't apply for any more grants and we didn't get any more grants, it's like, well, okay. But we should get a multiplier effect from it if we're doing it right.
Well, maybe this is, there are some things that we've discussed, like a better procedure for monitoring fund balance, contingent fund and spending that impacts them. That's just a question of establishing some sort of schedule for the appropriate department to report to us. Like the quarterly reports on contingent fund, for example, the quarterly reports on approximately where our fund balance is. I just don't feel like I'm competent or this committee's competent to actually define metrics on these grants. I think the better course might be if admin would just periodically be able to report back to us, we've applied for this and this and this and this, that would benefit these departments, and we got X amount of dollars. I mean, would that?
Yeah, I think the
Yeah,
metrics
okay.
can be pretty simple. And we are processing a tremendous amount of grant money. I mean, it comes through all the different departments. Certainly, we are in the grant business now, but I don't think we have a sense of, our how much full dollar value and what our batting percentage is. And it could be simple metrics.
That could be something that this person does, is they
yeah.
would start off right away and they could give a report and then,
Right now, we have no metrics.
Right.
Does that make sense, Norma?
Yep, we have an RFP out right now for the
grant,
yeah, so.
Okay. And then the last thing I had, we talked a lot about base budgeting. And I have to tell you, I don't really understand what exactly you're saying when you talk about base budgeting and evaluating base budgeting. Can somebody explain it? I mean, I know people gave specific examples, like what are all these elections costing us, and what's it going to cost us to comply with the new assigned council hourly rates and stuff like that, but what exactly are you talking about with base budgeting, Rich?
Mike has his hand up. I'll go second.
Okay, Mike?
I think what you're talking about is looking at the regular budgets in the budget book and what is spent every year, what changes have been made in departments, and reviewing them. We used to do that at the committee level, and to suggest, are there things that ought to be cut there or increased in the base amount, not just the over targets. And we really don't look at those. We don't look at, why is your postage up? We don't look at why do you need a new car? That kind of thing. So I think that's what we're talking about when we're talking about their base budgets, at least in my understanding.
Well, doesn't somebody in the county do that? I mean, is that really?
According to the fiscal policy, that's done mid-year by
each department?
By the committee.
This committee?
But that's a current, we're changing the fiscal policy, but because I don't think that is the way it's been done.
Yeah, Mike is right. And we've invested a fair amount of effort in RBA. And the idea being RBA should be results-based accountability, should be giving us some sort of sense of, are we getting value for what we're spending? But we're really not doing any analysis, at least on the legislature level, of, is that happening? And so that's what's meant, I believe, base budgeting.
Okay, well, I guess, I guess we ought to be putting that, on our committee agenda for July or August. And I'm afraid what that means is that the departments in administration are going to have to generate the data for us to do that process.
They are doing RBA. I think the risk here is that RBA has really been used internally for them to say, how's it going? If that is a tool used by us to start evaluating base budgets, the risk is that the integrity of the RBA process might be undermined. Am I being clear?
Well, RBA just kind of faded into the background. There have been some personnel changes.
I don't think it went away, did
It's
it?
still active.
Someone's actually doing
Yeah,
it.
Bridget's been working on that.
Okay. Well, if the data's there, I mean, I don't know where else the data would come from at this point, Rich. I'm not willing to.
This is a hard process, you know, and I think we could really only hope to get the glaring examples. If there's a ton of money going somewhere and we don't seem to see any RBA positive outcomes, we should know that. But getting down to, you know, postage, as Mike suggested, we're going to drive ourselves crazy and the departments, so we don't want to do that. But
Noses in, fingers out.
yeah, yeah. But if there's big dollars moving, we should have some sense that it's going to a good cause. Yeah,
So base budgeting is really a question of determining if we're getting a decent ROI for the money we're spending. Okay.
Yeah, so we are implementing new software this year. And there's a good chance that this new software will provide some opportunities for this type of review in a easier way than what we have presently. You know, our systems are disjointed, and hopefully the attempt to working with finance and HR is we're going to have a more cohesive reporting system. So, and maybe, hopefully, we'll actually have something by July. So, wouldn't that be great?
Well, we'll kind of set July, August as our
I
target.
have it in my notes, though, Rich, I promise.
So we'll set that as our target timeframe. I'm wondering, too, if this isn't something, if the results of our analysis or evaluation should not be included when we do our budget hearings in the fall. You know, if we're already throwing money at something and it's not producing results, should we be throwing more money in the same direction? I don't know. That's a tough one.
And the report itself isn't going to necessarily give you the kind of information we're talking about either, I don't think. I think it's really talking to the departments, finding out what's happening. I mean, they're really going to be able to give you much better sense. Just what's on paper isn't going to give you a good sense of how things are going.
Well, to me, it seems like there's a role for the program committees in
Yes.
here as well. So I don't know. I think we're going to struggle with this one.
I think we will. You know, it's that old saying that if it's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. I mean,
I hadn't heard that.
well, but the idea being you do your best, you know, rather than just saying this is going to be hard and, you know, maybe it's not perfect.
Well, I'm not saying we won't do it. I'm just trying to temper expectations.
Yes.
Let's put it that
We
way.
should very much temper expectations.
Okay. All right. Well, I will send out an email to the committee members, and I will copy Norma and Lisa and Bridget and Ruby and Drew on what I think the results of our goal-setting discussion have been. And, you know, if I get it wrong, I have no doubt that someone will correct me.
Deborah?
Yes?
So what we talked about last time, you're going to be reviewing also. I brought up about my concern about morale, for example.
Yeah,
And,
I do remember that, Mike.
We
and I
can
don't
be
know what
looking at that.
I don't know what we can do about that as a committee.
Well, you take an example. We passed a resolution at our last legislature meeting that went public about our corrections officers. And I don't know whether we've had feedback from that can be discussed publicly or not, but that was an effort to try to help with some morale issues, I think. And that's the kind of thing that I'm worried about with our folks with this inflation spiral we're in right now.
I have absolutely no idea what to do with that, Mike, other than, you know, as someone pointed out last month, whenever we have an opportunity to, as a legislature as a whole, whenever we have an opportunity to take an action that benefits our employees, that shows our employees that we value them, we do that.
Well, maybe we say as a goal that we monitor the morale. We do our best to monitor it.
I will put it on the list. I just have no idea what that's going to look like. But, okay.
Thank you.
Drew?
Just, I do have one other update that I forgot to mention when it's appropriate.
Okay, it's appropriate. Go for it.
Okay. The New York State budget includes a change to how we do the tax foreclosure auctions. And I think Bill Troy has mentioned this a few times, that there are court cases right now if somebody's property goes to auction for past due taxes, we keep the full proceeds even if it's more than their tax amounts. And a quick look at it is probably a third or a quarter of them sell for more than what they owe in taxes. Most of them do not. Again, that changes each year depending on what parcels we have in that. The problem currently, so I think from the courts are going to order us anything above what we collect that they owe is going to be turned back to the homeowners or the lien holders. And that's the concern that is coming through NICE that I've been discussing with some of the other treasurers and financial officers, is this could really put us in a replacement for banks, because right now banks will often step in and pay the property taxes if the mortgage and the property value, if all the numbers work out. Unfortunately, the way the state's budget wording has it is the county would be able to foreclose, sell the property at auction, and then any remainder would go to a bank if they held a mortgage that wasn't fully covered.
In which case, they could just sit back and let us do all the work and they take the money.
Right. And it may force a lot of extra work on our staff or Bill and Holly or a consultant, if we consult it out, to determine who has priority as far as mortgages and lien holders and how much is currently owed. Actually, I think it was Rensselaer County just pointed out that they estimate as many as 25 to 30% of all property liens and mortgages are fully paid. They just haven't filed the correct paperwork with the county clerk to extinguish that. So there could be a lot of work done if somebody has a mortgage, a home equity, and maybe a couple other liens on their property. Somebody's going to have to research, find out what the balance is, find out if it's been paid, find out what order they were done in, who has first, second, third. And then it also is concerning, as another county officer put out, is right now there's requirements in the courts before a bank does foreclosure to have appropriate counseling with the property owner. Make sure they're aware that they may lose their house, make sure they have all their options known to them, and this would short circuit that. Well, in Tompkins County, we do try to visit each property owner. That is not a requirement anymore under New York state law. You can send them as little as, I think it's 4 letters over a 3-year time, and you can sell their property at auction. I can publish it in the newspaper, get the court order, things like that. So there are some concerns with how New York State has worded it. So we are working with NISAC to see if there's any suggested either amendments to it or changes. I just wanted this committee to be aware that that's coming down the pike.
Well, you're just a little bluebird of happiness there, Drew. Thank you.
I got the blue shirt on, Tompkins County shirt, so.
Okay. All right. I think that's everything. Does anybody have anything that we didn't cover or you want to discuss? In that
Are you
case,
still talking goals?
I guess.
Because I've got a brief report from the TC3 Advisory Committee if there's any time.
Oh, sure. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mike.
The TC3 Capital Projects Advisory Committee, the two counties met this morning. As you know, they got that $3.12 million grant for the workforce development labs, basically, that's being worked on. They did run into some things that are causing overages. They found asbestos, and they found some of that embedded in the mastics and in the wall spackle and that kind of thing. And that cost about $130,000 to remediate. They also have had trouble getting union labor to be able to come in and do the work because of a shortage of people in the different trades that are available to do the work. And of course, anything that's done up there has got to be done with union labor or the equivalent wages. They're very grateful for having received just under $20,000 from our recovery grant program, which is going toward the child care and food pantry up there. The sidewalks project has now been completed and all the sidewalks are in. And they're looking next how they're going to get enough money to complete the parking lots and to rebuild the road. And that would be 50% counties, 50% state, if that were available. They're not asking for that tomorrow, but they want us to be aware that that's a project that's coming down. They've also got some boiler issues. They've got a mass announcement fire alarm and emergency notification system that they've got to deal with. A few other things like some doors and loading docks, and those are the main things that they're talking about. It's nothing really new. They've been talking about that with the capital program here for over a year, but I thought I'd let you know what was discussed today.
Thanks, Mike. Did they get their problem with the burst pipes in the dormitory resolved?
I think so. They were going to have those repaired like the next day, and I imagine they're going to have. I'll find out more about that Thursday night when I go to the board meeting. But I believe there ought to be insurance coverage, and also they had. Dr. Kremenek said that they would make the students whole for anything that they lost, as well as they had to move them out of the dorm into another dorm temporarily.
Well, I'm glad that there's insurance involved.
I believe there is.
Okay, well, we'll stay tuned for further exciting developments. Thank you. Anything else? Then we stand adjourned. Thank you all. See you next month.